Hello, my name is Pasoulas. I'm the principal investigator of the agency-funded research project Solving Palimpsest and the director of music and audio arts sound theatre at the University of Kent. Our project investigates the oral signature of historical contexts and the potential of sound to evoke impressions and new understandings of the past. One of the questions we are exploring in our research concerns ways we can utilize sounds to construct experiences of overlaid histories. We aim to create situations where visitors can rediscover histories and places through the sonic medium. I'd like to talk about an installation we completed, which was exhibited in the mezzanine of Slip 3 at Chatham Historic Dockyard between 4 and 8 May this year. The installation is called History Revisited, exploring the sounds and stories of Chatham Historic Dockyard, and it was designed for 3 projectors and 26 loudspeakers playing 18 sound compositions in a loop. The loudspeakers were spread in the huge space of the mezzanine, which is a little more than 1.6 square kilometers. The slip where the mezzanine is was built in 1838. The frame was designed by Sir Robert Seppings and the cover was built like an upside-down ship. The space is very impressive visually, and with its wooden structure, it evokes past ages beyond our lifetime. We chose to use that space for our installation because of its strong historical allusions. Our aim was to let visitors discover that historic space by navigating it through sound and also to emphasize sonic experiences by exposing visitors to such a powerful space. The loudspeakers were organized in pairs so they could play back stereophonic sound. Visitors walked around, approaching individual pairs to experience audio stories and sounds related to the dockyard. We had 2 types of composition in the audio part of the installation. One type contained compositions created by our research team, and the other included soundscape pieces created by schoolchildren. Our own compositions were based on oral history archival material, interviews that we conducted, and sounds that we recorded or created from scratch. Those sounds were informed by the descriptions given by the interviewees. For example, in one of the archive tapes, a former dockyard worker recalled the coal-burning ships, how coal was carried, and how 40 to 50 men had to wash themselves at the end of the day using only 3 buckets of water. Obviously, it was not a word-for-word transfer of descriptions into sound representation that we did, but the vivid images given by the interviewee informed the soundscape we created. We emphasized memories by giving an impression of past soundscapes, also letting the voices speak for themselves at the same time. Stories in our installation contained personal accounts, descriptions, memories, and anecdotes that were evocative and became alive again through the human voice, which gave a personal view of events from the vantage point of the person who experienced them. The second type of compositions, created by schoolchildren of Canterbury Academy Secondary School, used field recordings of Chatham Dockyard which we provided. In November 2021, our team delivered workshops at Canterbury Academy. The workshops focused on using location sound to generate musical ideas, initiating also discussions on the changes in the local sound environment and social life. Our approach to historical aspects was through sound rather than tangible objects, writings, or images. The students responded very positively and creatively to our invitation to compose short soundscape pieces. Our project created a link between the young generation and an important heritage site, encouraging children to value local history and their heritage through their own creations. All soundscape pieces in the installation were played in loops, starting and ending at different points in time. Thus, the overall soundscape was never repeated exactly the same. 3 screens displayed images of the dockyard archives, emphasizing further the connection between the soundscapes and histories. We did not expect visitors to listen and see everything. Our aim was to create a versatile, malleable sonic space with its own life and memories, which could be experienced for as long as the visitor wished. Some visitors walked slowly through the space without stopping, awed by the historic landmark which was filled with voices and nautical sounds. Others stayed for much longer, going from one story to the next, listening intensively. Many people came in groups, including schools, which often visit the dockyard. In the 5 days that the installation stayed, we give a conservative estimate of 200 visitors. Visitors left very positive comments for our work, and our team talked to many of them who were enthusiastic about the installation. They found it very engaging and they regarded it as an integral part of that historic space. With our installation, we wanted to draw attention to the key role that sound plays in understanding and communicating history. Our work was received enthusiastically both by the general public and the Dockyard Museum, who are adapting their approach to exhibiting history by developing a new direction in representing the past with new methods of display to include sound in order to enhance the visitor experience and help visitors to understand the different levels of local history. The new direction is evident by the request to host the installation again for a longer period, the commission they gave us to create a soundscape for the new Ropery Gallery, and the discussions we currently have on a new sound installation that will present aspects of the dockyard history in layers of past ages. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Brona and I'm the Research Associate on the Sonic Palimpsest project, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about the importance of oral history archives in acoustic heritage. As part of this project, we have been digitising cassettes belonging to Chatham Historic Dockyard Trust. These cassettes feature interviews with former workers of the dockyard. Interviews were carried out in 1983, 2003 to 2006 and 2013. In 2021, we carried out our own interviews with former dockyard workers, with questions focused on the experience of sound within the dockyard. We also interviewed women who worked at the dockyard as their voices were missing from the archive. Within the archive, oral history interview topics include working in the Navy during World War II, working at the dockyard, the impact of world events and conflict on the dockyard and on life in general, attending the dockyard school, health and safety and trade unions, naval expeditions, women working at the dockyard, and the Zeebrugge raids. The dockyard closed in 1984, so we cannot explore and observe the dockyard as a working environment. Perhaps even if the dockyard was open, we would be unable to explore the site due to naval secrecy and would have to rely on interviews as sources of information. The oral history archives reveal a wealth of information in relation to people, place and space. As we hear these personal stories, we can create images of these environments and develop an understanding of the relationship between people and place, such as the dockyard workers and the dockyard. Details of the daily activities of the workers are further enhanced by an exploration of photographs, maps and engravings of Chatham Dockyard, and we can begin to imagine and understand how the dockyard sounded. We can see how the dockyard changed, such as how buildings were added or demolished to make room for new ones. As the dockyard grew and changed, so did the soundscape. Many of the interviewees from the oral history archives do not discuss sound, as they describe their daily lives at the dockyard or their experiences of war. However, recent interviews carried out by the Sonic Palimpsest team revealed that when interviewees were prompted and asked about sound, workers were able to recall the sounds that occupied their working environments. It is through these recent interviews that we can begin to dissect the soundscape of the dockyard, breaking it down into its different architectural components and thinking about the different types of spaces where workers carried out their daily tasks. We can also begin to question how these acoustic spaces affected the sounds within them, causing sounds to be reverberated, reflected or dampened. Representation of women in the archives. As we digitise the archives, we have discovered that women's voices are underrepresented, and this can be seen in various collections and projects that occurred over the years. For example, the VE Day Victory in Europe Day, May 1945, and Homefront Recall collections, recorded in 2005 and 2006 respectively, feature interviews with people who lived in the Medway towns discussing their experiences of World War II. 4 out of 11 of the interviewees are women. 3 of these women were children during World War II, and they discussed their experiences of going to school, being evacuated, sleeping in air raid shelters, and VE Day celebrations. For example, Mrs. Betty Saxby Taylor describes how most of her family worked in the ropery, and that her mother earned very little. She also comments on how Chatham has changed as houses have replaced woodland. So this is an image of the ropery, just to give you an idea of the sense of the space and the size of the space. And it's still a fully functioning ropery today. And that is just an older image of the attic of the ropery, which is a really interesting space. It's not open to the public, but it has been used in films, I believe. Another interviewee, Mrs. Wade, worked as a secretary and discussed her work duties at Chatham Dockyard, witnessing ships returning from Dunkirk in 1940, travelling up the River Thames, and how she slept in an Anderson air raid shelter during night bombings. She describes how the Smithery was bombed in 1940 while she was working at the dockyard, and the impact that it had on her, her friends, and her working environment. She also describes how sometimes she had to work in a shelter during the war because the men had to get paid, and that during the war there was a terrific din at Chatham because of all the ships that were in would open up, and there were also guns on Tower Hill. We also discovered a cassette which featured an interview with a lady called Noreen Chambers. Mrs. Chambers worked as a clerical officer at the dockyard just before it closed in 1984. She talks in detail about the process of the dockyard closing, about her experiences of working in the dockyard and enjoying the history of her workplace. She comments on there being a feeling of loss as every Friday they said goodbye to someone or something, like a person or a ship, like a little funeral every week. She also mentions that more and more buildings had signs that said not to be reoccupied. Chambers' account gives us a rare insight into what it was like to work in the dockyard as it began the process of closing down. So, new additions to the archives. As mentioned earlier, we wanted to expand the archive to include more interviews with women. Women's stories and voices offer many different perspectives of life at the dockyard since they have different jobs compared to men and worked in different buildings, for example, the spinning rooms or the drawing office. So far, we have interviewed 4 women whose job roles include a tracer, someone who traces complex engineering plans, a master rope maker who still works in the ropery and is the first female rope maker in the dockyard, a former Wren from the Women's Royal Naval Service, before women were integrated into the naval service with the men, and a clerical officer. However, we are still eager to interview more women and expand the archive further. The aim of the interviews was to discuss their experiences of the dockyard while also describing the soundscape of their workplace. For example, Leanne Clark is currently a master rope maker who works at the ropery today. In her interview, she talks about the sounds of the ropery and how this unique space is rarely silent. She discusses how they use bells to communicate between the workers, and when they ring, this signals that you must do the opposite of what you are currently doing. For example, if the machine is on, turn it off. Clark also mentions how the ropery is very rarely silent, and that when it is, it feels unnatural. This description of the ropery, combined with the field recordings which we made, will enable us to create an accurate sonic experience of this unique working environment, which is 1/4 mile in length. Sandra Fraser discusses her role as a former tracer at the dockyard, where she worked from 1961 to 67. She describes how she would trace an electrical drawing using linen and different types of pens to trace the drawing for the draftsman. Fraser describes how she would hear clanking from outside as machinery was being moved around, or you would hear the train going down the track. Inside, she would hear the tracers chatting amongst themselves. So this is an image of the dockyard train, which still goes around the dockyard when you visit, and we've made a lot of recordings of this train. To conclude, many of the interviews with men follow a similar narrative. They discuss how they became apprentices at the dockyard, attended the dockyard school, and discussed their job roles as shipwrights, boilermakers, plumbers, engineers, and pattern makers. But if women's voices are not part of the archive, then we are missing out on the stories of female apprentices and those who worked as tracers, clerical officers, and spinners. The addition of women's voices ensures that a diverse range of knowledge, memories, and experiences can be shared with researchers and the general public. And thank you for listening.
Hello, my name's Andrew Knighthill. I'm the co-investigator on the Sonic Palimpsest project and the director of the Sound Image Research Institute at the University of Greenwich. So what does it mean to bring sounds back into the building? This entire research trajectory was originally inspired by my time living in an apartment within a converted factory building in Leicester. I was struck by how the walls and the facades of the buildings remained, but the transformation of the entire cultural quarter area in the city left little trace of the life and the industrial activity that it replaced. I wondered how the sounds of the machinery in those factories would have reverberated down the narrow streets, and how the bustle and crowds of people, trucks, carts, and materials would have contrasted with the quiet pedestrianised lanes and the clink of spoons in teacups. Along this journey, I realised a wider significance, that sound actually has the potential to de-objectify the past and to create affective tracings of spaces and places. Perhaps most importantly, it affords us the opportunity to create humanised readings of the past. Sound is a marker of action and events. Each act generates a sound. Thus, to ensound a space is to convey action into it and to effectively enliven it. Sound inherently highlights materiality and it welcomes subjectivity. So, on this question, it's important to reflect upon what steps we might take to ensure that the mediated experiences of the past that we construct do not adulterate the very heritage that it seeks to evoke. Whilst our work is always built upon inferences and filling gaps in the historical record, one of the great opportunities of our oral history research and interaction with living people has been to enable a process of feedback which creates the ability to fact-check our soundscape work, which gives us confidence in our process and that we can then apply to earlier timeframes for which we don't have any living participants to confirm. The goal of this entire research was to understand the sonic significances within the material labour of physical action that's undertaken by those people working in the dockyard, and to investigate if sound and sonic thinking could help unlock new and alternative perspectives on the heritage and history of this space. The approach is deeply inspired by conceptual ideas from practice research, such as Tim Ingold's concepts around making, in which he argues that there are two ways of understanding. You can know about something, or one can know through something. And these two distinct modes of understanding provide unique perspectives and insights. We believe that the outcomes of our research in sonifying spaces or ensounding spaces helps to convey this sense of knowing through. And it is the goal of our work to convey an affective reality and transmit that feeling of an experience. Similar to work in a film soundtrack, we must make up for missing kinesthetic and olfactory inputs. Sound, therefore, can communicate via subtle heightened means an experience that goes beyond the factual, but in doing so actually accesses experiences that can more closely approximate the lived reality. It's of course an ethical responsibility of the artist to ensure balance and parity in this area. But we're fortunate that the sonic tendency towards openness and subjectivity provides the natural affordance for multiple interactions and experiences on the part of audiences and participants. Our research has explored how oft-neglected sounds can afford new perspectives on our experiences of space and place.